Oh, Walther PPK Frame Disassembly. We're finally getting to it, guys. Finally getting to it after a long time. Apologize for it taking so long to get to this, guys, but there's just been a lot of stuff going on, and I wanted to practice taking it apart a few times just to be on the safe side. So we've done that. We've gone. Now, I've gone ahead and done the basic fill strip on it. The guys try to save a little bit of time, and we're just going to take it apart. We're going to name everything. We're going to put her back together. So when you have your basic fill strip apart, and we've covered that before, this is what you're left with. First thing we're going to do is take the grips off. Now remember, guys, this is I believe this is what you would call a pre-1968, if I'm not mistaken, model of this. I believe that the ones that you get now do not have this full grip on it. They come in two different pieces. I'll show you in just a second. But you basically just slide toward the bottom and pull them off. And so these are the original grips. But the ones that you have now have part of the frame that comes down even further. Make sure that we are in frame here. Move that up just a little bit. Okay. But they come down here a little bit, and all this is actually on the inside of a piece of frame, and the grips that you get now are panels that go on either side. So it's a little bit different. But you get your, the very first thing you do is take your grips off, and then we're going to decock it because it's easier if the hammer is up. Now, okay, and so the best way to get this off right here is I've got a pair of vice grips. Now right here, guys, hopefully you'll be able to see this. This is where the bottom part of the hammer strut comes through whenever it's cocked. You can see it kind of coming through right there. And so we want to go around that. So I'll use a pair of vice grips. You can use anything, but this lariat will come off. All right. So what we want to do is try to push up on this. And it's got a small hook that will hook in the side of it. When you get it pushed up, it's kind of hard to do it here. You can lift it out. Whoops. Dropped it like a dumbass. But here is the lariat and hammer strut hold. Now, that relieves the tension off the hammer strut and the mainspring, and it comes free. But try to do this here again. This sits in this frame pretty much like this, okay? Hammer strut comes down with the spring, puts a lot of pressure here, and you're pushing up on this to come out of this hook right here where this locks into it, and then you just kind of lift it away. You can go ahead and take the hammer retaining pin out, and the hammer will shoot up, but it's easier to me if you take this strut off first, and then that way all of this stuff tends to come free a little bit easier. And you just take a punch, which I do not have ready, and you push it right out. And there's your hammer pivot spring. Flip the firearm over, and then you have your hammer release lever. Slides up. Take it and set it out, and then the hammer lifts up and out of the frame. Okay. Now this part of the hammer right here, I don't really know what they call this, but this is in cane. I liken this to more or less like a sear, and it is spring loaded. There's a pin here. Not taking that out because I don't see any reason to take that out, and that's a pain in the ass to get back in. But if that spring ever breaks, that is kind of a pain, but I don't see any purpose in taking that out right now. The next thing that we're going to do is take the slide hold lever out, and you can literally just kind of lift this up and pull it out. Now, this has a spring right here that fits down into this groove here, and it's kind of folded over like a V. You don't want to lose that. If you do, you can make another one, but it's better just not to lose this one. And it doesn't really have much of a track to hold into. There's a small indentation up here, but if you lift out on it, you can pop it out and it'll come free. Okay, then the next thing that we really want to do is we're going to try to remove the trigger bar. And before you do that, there's a pin here that will help a lot if you push this pin out. You can set it down, and where's some tape here? Best thing in the world. If you take this trigger pin out first, and just use the back end of a bigger punch, a small punch, tap it out. And then what you find here is that the trigger pin has a small groove, and that groove will actually be as you're looking at the firearm to the left side, okay? And then from here, the best way to do this is to pull the trigger slightly, push this forward, and what you have here is there's a small track that right up in this part of the frame here that the trigger bar actually rides in. So you want to push this forward as much as possible. Pull this down because you're going to want this as far forward as possible, and then you can actually just use I hold it down with my thumb here as much as possible, and then you can actually lift it out. With the screwdriver. And just keep working with it until it comes free, and there it is. It's starting to come free now. And you release the trigger. The trigger bar will come out. And there is a spring here, but it's attached to the trigger, so don't worry about it too much. And just try to kind of work the trigger bar and turn it, and it comes right out. And here's your trigger bar. And there is a spring here on this trigger, and then the next thing that we're going to have to do is pull that out. And so you can actually pull down the trigger guard, and then the trigger will come out. Now when this goes back together, guys, this trigger bar, there's a small channel in which this spring rides in, and it rides in it just like this, okay? And so it pushes down, and then this pin of the trigger bar actually goes into this first notch. So for lack of a better expression, as quickly as possible, as hastily as possible, it fits like this. And this is your trigger spring that fits down inside this trigger bar. The trigger spring can come off of the trigger. I'm not going to take it off. You can twist it off and then put it back on, but we'll leave that as one unit. And the next thing that you're going to take off is the trigger guard itself, and this is a pain in the ass, okay? So, battery died. Sorry, guys. Anyway, we're fixing to take the trigger guard off. Now, this trigger guard is under a tremendous amount of pressure. The spring that goes up in here is under a lot of pressure. And so what you basically have to do is you have to figure out a way to hold this, and you can press this trigger guard in, and you'll feel it depress the spring slightly, and you have to take that pin out. Now, what I have found is the easiest way to do this is to really kind of start it first, okay? I use a well oversized punch. Give it one tap. And once it starts through, it's a lot easier to get going. You can take a smaller punch and just drive it out. When it comes to a certain point, it'll snap back down. Here's where you literally have to push up on it, and you have to find a way to hold it to get it to go on through. And this is the fun part. You literally have to muscle it through that part and push the pin on through. All right. And then the trigger guard will come free, the trigger guard spring and plunger, and then also the magazine release will come out at that time too. Now this thing is under a lot of pressure. This is the trigger guard spring and plunger, and it's a lot of fun. Now the pin that holds it has a notch on either end. It's smaller in the middle and bigger on each end, but it's symmetrical, so it doesn't matter which way it goes back in. Okay, and then the only other thing to take out is the hammer block and hammer block spring. There's a small plunger that's on here, right? And what you do is you press down, pull it over, take the plunger out, and then the hammer block and spring come on out. So small screwdriver. Take the plunger out. Very, very small, so be careful not to lose it. And then the hammer block and spring, slide it back over into its position, and then it will come out. And again, you can take the spring off, but there's really not any reason to. All right, and then the only other thing, there's two other things on here, guys, that we're not going to take off. One is the barrel. Now these barrels are press fitted into this frame. Not going to take that out, because once you take that barrel out, it's the only reason it's supposed to be took out is if you're going to replace it, okay, or do work to it, because you would have to find a barrel and have it repressed, fitted in there. And the other thing is actually what they call I believe it's called a cocking piece. I call it the cocking bar, or the cock bar. There you go. This right here rides, and it's got two pins. Okay, on either side. They're not all the way in, but there's slots that come out on the frame, and you can actually turn this and start it coming out. Okay, if you were going to take this off, you would literally take a punch and a small tap hammer, and you would tap each side, go on each side and try to keep it even, like you would say you're just going to put a tire back on a vehicle. Tap it off so it doesn't kink to one side, and then it would come on out. Don't want to take it out, because that will wear over time, taking it in and out. But that's the only other part. There's your frame disassembly, guys, right there. So what we'll do is we'll name all the parts here, and then we'll put them back. Let's put them in some kind of order. We'll name all the parts, and then we'll put it back together. Okay, guys, before we put it back together, let's go ahead and name everything real quick. Of course, we have our frame itself here. Of course, the parts we did not take off was the barrel and the cocking piece, or what we call the cock piece, or the cock bar. Then we have the slide stop and ejector, the trigger bar, the trigger itself, the trigger spring, or excuse me, the trigger pin, the hammer release, the hammer strut spring, the hammer itself, the hammer pivot bar or pivot pin, the trigger guard plunger and spring and pin, and the magazine release. Those are the parts that we have. Now I've gone ahead and I put the hammer block and block spring and pin back in the frame. I've gone ahead and done that off camera. Not a real significant part, and basically the cock piece, or the cocking piece, rides on it whenever the hammer comes to it. I'll show you the function of that here in just a moment. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and put the trigger and the trigger bar back in. Now the spring sits at a hook like this, so we're just going to kind of put it in and pull it across, kind of turn it. And if you'll remember, the trigger bar, it has this slot in the bottom of it, and that spring will ride into it. Now whenever you put, and also back here it has this slot here, or this little raised part of it that fits inside this opening on the cocking bar, or the cock piece. So we're going to put that in actually, and then we kind of fish this around. I know my fingers are in the way, guys, but we're basically going to put the spring inside that channel where it rides. We're going to push the hammer, or the trigger, up into the frame itself, and then you more or less just kind of work with the trigger bar until it slides into that hole that's for the trigger itself. And then as long as it's in the opening back here, it's all right. Now we won't be able to test the functionality of it until we go ahead and put the pin in. So we'll put the trigger pin in now, line the hole up, and remember the groove in the pin itself goes to the left side of the frame. So we just kind of line this up, and once it starts, we give it a tap and put it on home. And then from here, you can see how the mechanism actually works. And you can also see inside here, you can see how it works, the hammer block. Okay. All right, the next thing that we want to put onto it is I'm going to go ahead and we're going to put the hardest part in right now, and that is the trigger guard and the magazine release. Now the magazine release, it has a half moon cut here, and remember it has a half moon that matches over on this side. So you put this in and you basically you turn it, you look on the other side until it lines up. Okay, now the trick part here is you have to hold the magazine release down. Okay, you put the trigger guard spring and plunger in, and then you have to put the trigger guard on it. Now this thing is under, like I said before guys, tremendous amount of pressure, and you have to literally hold it once you get it started with one hand and start this pin. And I don't know, got it. Once you get it started, then you can drive it home. Boy, it is a lot of fun to try to get in there. And you just drive it home. Now use a mallet because you don't want to mar up the side of the frame. Okay, and of course it's on and it works. All right, from here we're going to go ahead and put the hammer assembly in. And the hammer itself, remember this piece here I showed you where it's under spring tension? This hook right here will go on the bottom part of this cocking piece. So when you slide the hammer down in the frame, it'll go underneath it and it'll hold it. And that's it. And it usually will line the holes up pretty close. Then we're going to slide the hammer release down into place. We'll line the holes up. And then we have the pivot pin. Okay, and there's a slot right here. There's a little nipple right here on the pivot pin. Get in frame, dumbass. And it will line up with this little hole right here in the frame. So you just start it in and kind of work it on the other side, and it slides in and comes flush with the frame. All right, and then from here you can actually test the cocking of the trigger itself. Okay, you can see how it'll actually work. Okay, the next thing that we're going to put in is the strut. And the hammer strut faces toward the back. It kind of flares out toward the back, and it's real easy to go in. It only goes in one way, and then we hold it from here. Now, what I have done here with this layered holder and this bottom block here for the hammer strut, it's indented inside here so that the spring will fit, and so once you get the spring on there, it will guide the strut into it. So what I'm going to do is my hands are going to cover it up as I'm going to push down, and I'm going to get this part of this layer to hook into this part of the frame right here. Okay. And that's all there is to it. Okay, from here you can cock it, and there we're good to go. Then we're going to go ahead and put our slide stop in. Just lay it back into a place where it goes. Take a small screwdriver, this pin, pull it down, or push it down, and it'll go right into the slot. And that's how it functions. All right. And then we put our grips back on, and you can actually do, now let's go ahead and put the screw back in, get it completely back together. This is a simple part. I actually went back together pretty good. I usually have to fight with that trigger guard a lot more, guys. That's a bitch. Or it can be. All right, go ahead and cock it back. Pull down our trigger guard, put our recoil spring on, open end out. Goes in, do a function test on it, and that's it, gents. A reassembly of the Walther PPK pre-19, I believe, 68. And so let me know what you guys think. Hopefully you was able to pick up that stuff on camera okay, and hey, we'll see you next time. Later.